Here in part 4, let's talk about urban ecosystems and thrivability. This is an important part of sustainability as well. Here at the University of Utah, there's a significant effort underway using science to understand sustainability. What are the challenges? How do we create knowledge? How do we identify solutions? This is an effort that is not solely focused in biology. So issues of evolution and diversity might be central to biology, but the ecosystem services actually have a broader impact. Atmospheric sciences, city and metropolitan planning, fuels engineering, law, sociology, geology, geography, civil, and mechanical are all part of a large effort looking at sustainability of our natural resources. These are centered through what is now known as the Global Change and Sustainability Center, which is interdisciplinary, it's multidisciplinary, it links biology, evolution, and sustainability. If you'd like to know some more about this, I encourage you to go to this website, environment.utah.edu, to find out about the programs underway now and the research opportunities available now. Let's explore just two of these. Let's say I am interested in health and human health. And in the kind of health I'm going to be interested in are heart attacks, strokes, asthma, all those conditions that are associated with poor air quality. So if I'm in the law end of things, if I'm trying to understand things, we can regulate atmospheric composition. And we'll be talking about gases such as methane, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, VOCs, ozone, and PM, particulate matter, PM. These are going to be derived largely from fossil fuels, but they also come from landfills, if I do wood burning, and dust. So the biology associated with this is to understand what is driving, what are the sources of these gases, do we regulate them? If so, how? And how do they directly impact human health here in the Salt Lake Valley, but also the climate, bringing together global concerns? So you might ask yourself, sitting in the middle of winter here, what science is needed to improve our quality of life, to make this area more sustainable? We get inversions in the winter. Only the inversions that we get are not white fog. They tend to be dark colored fogs associated with trapped pollutions. We understand now the science of why this happens, and that's because when we get a high pressure in the Intermountain West, that tends to settle the air. If we have a white reflective surface, that is snow, that tends to reflect the energy, and when the sun is low in the sky, there's insufficient energy because of the reflection associated with snow to raise the energy balance of the system and create turbulence and wind. So we understand that. Now we have to think about what are the solutions to make the quality of life for us better. Well, one of these happens to be yours and my driving habits. These are data from getting in a vehicle, which is equipped with sensors to measure gas concentrations. The University of Utah has a couple of these vehicles. And for the last several years, Google has been driving throughout the valley. You might have seen these vehicles. They have one big tall sensor array of sensors, and they also have a series of cameras. And as they drive through, and here you see driving through downtown the University of Utah, down the freeway, back up the Bangerter Highway and back, what you see is that it's measuring gas concentrations. That is, what is the carbon dioxide level? Where's the carbon dioxide coming from? Your car, my house, my factory, my business. What you notice here is that it's not constant, but it's spiky. And if you look at a little bit closer at these spikes, what you notice is that every single spike is associated with an intersection. That is, we tend to have very high CO2 concentrations where people idle. Because if I look at traffic, it's stopped in one direction or another direction, So half the traffic is always stopped. That results in elevated carbon dioxide concentrations. Elevated carbon dioxide, elevated PM2.5, elevated carbon monoxide. So these become hotspots for air quality, hotspots that impact your health and mine. We can get a better feel of this by now looking at it from a different perspective. Again, driving away from the university through downtown, down the freeway, down out here to Daybreak, coming up the Bangalore Highway. Again, you see each of these individual spikes associated with intersections. But what you see is that overall, CO2 concentrations are much higher, anywhere from 400 to 800 parts per million higher than the background. So if the background is 400 parts per million, that's 800 parts per million. Whereas out here in Daybreak or up here in Emigration Canyon, the level is much lower, maybe about 20 parts per million above background. So there's a big spatial gradient here associated with where those gases are produced. But on the other hand, that might be the story for looking at CO2 concentrations, but it's not the story for ozone. So these are data from tracks. And the University of Utah and the Global Change and Sustainability Center have mounted sensors on tracks. And as it goes from southern part of the valley on up through to the University of Utah, back and forth, we measure CO2 concentrations. We see the spikes that I've been talking about, but you also see that in the areas away from high traffic, the CO2 concentration increase is smallest. But now when we look at ozone, a different gas, we see exactly the opposite. What we see is that the lowest ozone concentrations are here where the CO2 is being generated, and the highest ozone concentrations are at the edges of the valley. So how can this be? What is the complexity? How does this interact with human health? The answer turns out to be rather straightforward. When you look at carbon dioxide, you're looking at gases that are immediately emitted. But ozone takes time to form. So even though the nitrogen gases that are going to contribute to making ozone are produced here, it takes time for those gases to interact with oxygen to actually produce ozone. So you tend to get higher ozone concentrations on the edges of the valleys rather than the center. So when people talk about health, you realize that there may not just be a single straightforward answer. What happens in terms of PM2.5 and CO2 emissions, what happens in terms of ozone impacts are quite different. But these are areas where we can come together to identify sustainable solutions. Let's switch to a second topic associated with key research taking place at the University of Utah related to biodiversity and sustainability. How can urban landscapes thrive in an arid city? Utah is the second driest state in the nation, Nevada being the driest, yet we have one of the greatest water uses. How can we thrive in a world where water availability might decrease, particularly as population sizes increase? Well, why don't we begin to understand native vegetation? And can we develop thriving cities with native vegetation? There are many key research projects that are taking place now associated with the Global Change and Sustainability Center, with Red Butte Garden, and with the Center for Ecological Planning and Design in the College of Agriculture, trying to find water-wise, attractive landscapes. They're also interested in engineering solutions with a feature called green infrastructure. Now, green infrastructure is simply a term that talks about an engineered landscape. It's a way that we have come together to ask, how do we take water that would run off a road or off a parking lot and use that water to support vegetation, or to get that water into the local groundwater so that it can support trees? Green infrastructure is the solution, and the EPA, to help move us along, is encouraging and mandating that we have these kinds of solutions. And all across our campus, you'll see different kinds of designs for green infrastructure taking place. So we are using the campus as a living laboratory to explore different designs. Which designs are more efficient in terms of green infrastructure to reduce stormwater input? So stormwater management includes bioretention, pervious pavement, and green roofs. Here we're trying to understand the ecology of water used by shrubs and trees. We're trying to understand microbial ecology, the diversity of microbes in the soil, to understand how the pollutants coming off streets and parking lots can be detoxified by the microbes in soils. All part of a combination of biology, biodiversity, engineering, and planning. We even do have this revitalization here in our own backyard. We have a river, a small one called Butte Creek that goes right through campus. And I'll bet most of you didn't even know we had it. There is an effort underway, led by students, to revitalize this area, to make it a walkway, to make it more habitable, to get green infrastructure in place so that we're not putting pollutants into the river system. I encourage you to get engaged, if you would like, in these activities related to biodiversity and conservation by going to the GCSE website, Environment Utah EDU.